one of the main threads for instance, for learning how to work with non-binary clients that I kept reminding the therapists of during the course is that you need to have a complete perspective shift. You need to go out in the world, and if you see somebody and it's your barista at the coffee shop and you refer to them as she or he, you don't know that's true. That could be a non-binary person, or you could be misgendering them on a binary way. But just so I continue to remind people, you need to do the work of making this a shift, not just in your office, but you need to change the way you look at the entire world.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Dara Hoffman-Fox, a licensed professional counselor and private practice entrepreneur in Colorado, who also works with therapists all over the world. Listen as we dive into Dara's journey to becoming an author and leader in serving gender questioning, transgender, and non-binary people. If you've ever felt called to be a leader beyond the therapy room, you're going to relate to this conversation. Welcome, Dara. Thank you so much for being here.
This is great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I've been really wanting to talk to you. You were a therapist in private practice and still are, and you've also become a leader in this field, serving gender questioning, transgender, and non-binary people. And I know that there's a lot I don't know about your story, but I know that your leadership has really been growing since at least 2013. So when did you realize that you needed to come forward more with your leadership outside of the therapy room?
You know, it's really cool because I can actually pinpoint probably an actual month, and it was February of 2013. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where things just start happening. I am a really big fan of serendipity and synchronicity. Really, you know, when it's time for a big change to happen, I know that it's going to mean I need to pay attention to what's happening externally. And so a little bit before that, I remember I was thinking about, so it's just one of those moments. I remember I was just microwaving my lunch and I was thinking about my clients, and I was thinking, just something popped in my head where I realized probably at least 75% of my clients were either gender questioning or transgender or non-binary. And, you know, it just sort of struck me. And I was like, wow, that kind of sounds like an area of expertise. But no, I'm not an expert. You know, how can I say that? You know, because right now, when it comes to being, quote, a gender therapist, there's not a certification process. There's one that the WPATH organization is working on. But at this point, and especially back in 2013, you just, when you're ready to call yourself a gender therapist, meaning you do have that expertise, you just do it. And so what then happened really quickly after that was a series of events, and basically it involved it was only local exposure, but like the local paper interviewed me about a transgender child. The story for this child ended up going international. It was a really big deal because she was being discriminated against at her school, and her parents filed non-discrimination lawsuit. And so I was interviewed for it. And the first thing they said was that I was a gender therapist. And so it's kind of like I'm teasing about it, but I'm like, you know what? The Gazette said I'm a gender therapist. So you know what? Maybe I am at this point. But to boot, I also received an award from our local Pride Center having to do with, I believe that year it was like mental health counseling having to do with for the LGBT community. And there was an opportunity where I presented at a conference in Denver. So all these things happened within the same month. And I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Like, this is finally, I've been looking for my calling. It always happens like that. I'm looking for it over here to the east, and here it is over here to the west all along. And so I recognized that, okay, as somebody who I think I can say, that I have an expertise in this, but that seed finally got planted. It's like I finally started to water it and wanted to see where it would go. And my first step that I did was create a blog because I wanted to do more than what I just did inside my office individually with clients. I felt like I really wanted to teach other people what it meant for those who struggle with this. I just felt like there's such a strong, and still is, strong need for education around that. So that is the genesis of where that began.
Oh, so beautiful. It was like, we need you, the world was saying.
Yeah. And like I said, ever since I've even been a young teenager, I've known that for me, there's this thing called a life purpose or a calling, and then just really being frustrated as it happens, trying to figure out what that means, what that looks like. So honestly, it was a huge relief to finally figure out at least this is part of what I'm here on earth to do. And so it didn't know it beforehand, kind of didn't know it at the time, but it's one of those things you can look back on in retrospect and really recognize, oh, that's where that whole part of the hero's journey, finally, I heard the call to action and actually took it this time.
And then it seems like, there's so many moves that you've made to then step more into that leadership. But the way you're describing it, it's like once you knew this is what I'm supposed to be doing, then I'm imagining that made all those moves much more clear.
I would say that's definitely true. It felt like a combination, like where it's sort of like moving forward in incremental steps. I would do something and then basically wait for the feedback, and then do something else and then wait for the feedback. And so that really ended up working very well. For instance, I created the blog, and it was more so I just thought maybe my clients would read it, my family and friends, but I really I do enjoy Facebook, actually, and I just started sharing things on there, and more people were picking up on it. So I was like, okay, there is a need for this. What should I do with this, and what kind of information should I put on it? So I focused on that for a while, and then I also had I put it out there that I could be contacted, through email if you had any questions, and I didn't realize that was gonna turn into a thing, which was very helpful, because then that's where the part came in where people continued to, a lot of people were like, hey, can you help me figure out my gender identity? And knowing that it's impossible to do that through just a couple email exchanges, and for people who aren't my clients. But my gosh, what a huge need there was out there for it. And recognizing, oh, wow, there's not a resource out there like the one I can imagine really should be out there at this time to help people. There was definitely a gender workbook created by Kate Bornstein.
Yes.
But it's a little bit older. I reached out to her on Twitter and asked her if it's okay. I'm going to do
that's awesome.
a new book. And she was like, that's awesome. Best of luck to you. Because hers is really the original one, but, making it more updated, including non-binary stuff, and coming from the therapist perspective of wishing, what is a way I can put therapist inside a book, and then somebody who reads it can feel like they are actually going through this with a gender therapist. So that's an example of where, what do I do next? I just turn to my audience and check with them and see what feels like the next right move to make.
That's so brilliant, Dara. And you were getting all this input. So it wasn't just coming from your head of, this is what I'm imagining people want, this is what I'm imagining the need is. It was directly people saying over and over again, like, I need your help with this. I have this question for you.
Yeah. It sure is. And one more thing to mention, I did start my YouTube channel in 2014. And honestly, this was more of a personal gratification thing. My original degree and my original plan in life with my undergraduate studies, it was communication, which is very broad, but I wanted to get involved with media and maybe filmmaking, editing, things like that. And so I didn't know back in the 90s, there'd be this thing called YouTube one day that I could actually, I don't have to, be hired somewhere to do all this stuff. And so I realized, wow, I could make a YouTube channel now. I know how to edit, and I enjoy being on screen, and I could make these videos for people who are asking questions about transgender issues. And so I didn't know that was also a really good way that people actually, in 2014, they were looking things up on YouTube and said, oh, wow, there's a video here about this. So that was a different sort of approach that I took, but it's just something you have to make sure that you still do things that you really love and enjoy. And I've always loved video in that medium. And so it turns out that YouTube is it's its own search engine that people use. Some people are going to go to the blog and read. Other people want to, especially a lot of younger people, they want to be able to see your face and hear your voice and learn through that method.
Yes. And so that really lined up with one of your superpowers of being on screen, being yourself, and being comfortable.
I like it. It is a superpower.
Yeah. And I noticed that in one of your pictures, you have the S, which I thought was awesome. Right.
Right.
So was it always comfortable for you to be on video?
I think like anything else, it takes practice, and it feels kind of weird, just talking to nobody, but you have to really remember you actually are talking to somebody. So one thing that has helped me a lot, and I would say it started in 2013, is that I've listened to, at this point, thousands and thousands of hours of podcasts, and I just call them my entrepreneur podcasts. And at the time, I had an hour-long commute to work, hour-long commute back home. So I had plenty of time to listen to these podcasts. But there's seriously, like, there's such gold in those, and it's free. You can take it a step up and do different courses they offer and pay for things. But if you just listen to these entrepreneur podcasts, you just hear the best information, the best advice, and then you take it and it actually implement it, then it really works.
Oh, I love that. I bet we listen to a lot of the same things.
Oh, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And so you're talking a lot too about testing, like dipping your feet in, seeing what fits, seeing what response you're getting, and then going forward with that information, which I think is so great. Like if there's anyone listening who's thinking, I want to step into more leadership and let me wait and figure it all out first, and then I'll do it. Mm-hmm. I think this is a really good story to show us that that's not so much how it works.
I would say also you have to be open to when it's time to shift. And I would say that that's been happening for probably the last year or so that I've been, I wrote the book, and that was really to help a lot of gender questioning people. And it's not that I'm still not helping that group, but I've noticed when I have, for one, reached out in these different groups I'm in on Facebook to therapists who want to learn more about working with trans clients. There is a huge, same thing. I just noticed huge feedback, huge interest of people saying, please give us more. We definitely need more of this. So that's one thing. And then also, I myself identify as non-binary, and I have been sharing more of that part of my journey publicly, and that is also getting a really strong response. And anytime I post anything that has to do with, like, here's something I did today to try to teach somebody about my pronouns, or then it's just like, it just blows up. And then, so I've been taking note. I'm like, okay, the non-binary stuff, and then educating therapists. These two areas I need to focus a bit more on. I feel called to specifically address those.
Awesome. What are you, so far, what's happening, and how can therapists be getting more help from you?
So just a couple weeks ago, I launched my first online course, which again plays into my interest in being able to use video as a medium. But I did also survey a lot of therapists and asked, would you prefer this to be in a book form or like an online course? And overwhelmingly, people are wanting more of it to be through video. And so I was able to secretly be like, yay, that's what I wanted to do anyway. But and so this course specifically has to do with teaching therapists about working with non-binary clients. It's under the umbrella of what I'm calling the Trans Affirming Therapist Academy, and I'm doing it through the Teachable platform. And so this is an academy that is going to obviously have more courses in it, but right now there's just one. And my hope is every couple of months just to add a couple more courses. And so far the response has been fantastic just in terms of the interest in it. I do have a specific newsletter, so that's a good way for me to let the trans affirming therapists know. And again, just to back up a second, the phrase trans affirming therapist, I did borrow that somewhat from a Facebook group I'm in called LGBTQ and Trans Affirming Therapist. And just people started really to connect with that phrase. They may not feel like they're competent, but they know that they are affirming. They want to affirm people in their gender identity journey, but maybe they're still feeling nervous that they're not quite prepared fully the way they want to be. And so it's an invite to those who, if you're already trans affirming, that's great. That's all we ask. Now come on into the academy and start learning how you can feel more confident in your skills and your competency.
That's interesting, Dara. I'm thinking about like these different words like affirming, competent, and it makes me think of like how there's kind of a move for a lot of people away from competence and towards humility, and towards making the goal not that you know everything, because there can be a certain trap in that. I think particularly for people who are not part of the group that they want to affirm, but toward, I like this idea of affirming or humility where it's about like a lifelong commitment and, a commitment to continually being a student and wanting to do better and better with that group.
That's fantastic. It's interesting because the word competency, I've never really connected with that word myself. It feels very clinical.
Mm-hmm.
And when I surveyed therapists to ask them, what do you need help with when it comes to working with trans clients? I mean, they're just competent. I want to feel more competent. And I'm like, oh, I guess I need to use that somewhere in my marketing. But nonetheless, that really makes me think about, for instance, in the course that I created, one of the main threads for instance, for learning how to work with non-binary clients that I kept reminding the therapists of during the course is that you need to have a complete perspective shift. You need to go out in the world, and if you see somebody and it's your barista at the coffee shop and you refer to them as she or he, you don't know that's true. That could be a non-binary person, or you could be misgendering them on a binary way. But just so I continue to remind people, you need to do the work of making this a shift, not just in your office, but you need to change the way you look at the entire world all day, every day, and then it's going to sink in and you're going to start really catching yourself in this way. And then it'll come naturally to you with your clients that it'll happen like that. So I agree. It's like it's having to really take a step back and recognize your privilege and how is it revealing itself in your life.
I love that. Something I've noticed too is that for some folks who would think of themselves as affirming and I think want to be affirming will misgender people sometimes when that person isn't around, thinking of that, I guess, as maybe not as harmful. And it really is harmful. And I'm thinking that like a big place for people to be pushing themselves forward is to call people on that. Like if someone is misgendering someone who's not there, to go ahead and speak up in whatever way works for your personality, but to speak up. And I'm not saying this to be like a teaching moment. I'm not a teacher of this material, but it's something that I've been noticing in me is like more and more stepping up and saying like, oh, actually that person, the pronoun that they use is they. So that we're kind of changing the conversation every day. Like there's going to be so many opportunities every day.
Yeah, I think that hits the point where, people will ask me, how can I be a better ally? That sort of thing. And I think you're right that that's an excellent example and it's uncomfortable. So therefore it is really important that it's done.
Yeah.
You hear somebody misgender someone and having to pause the conversation and say that. I know it's hard for me to do that for myself. And so when somebody else does that for me, whether I find out about it later or it's in my presence, it's really, I could say from firsthand experience that it means a lot. There's some days where I just don't have it in me to do that. And just to clarify, if you're like with somebody and they're trans and you need to kind of have that conversation with each other first, like if you're going out to dinner and then say like, hey, if the server misgenders me, like, do you want me to speak up for you or do you want to do it yourself? Do you want to kind of play it by ear? Because you never know, like the person might not be comfortable with, in a sense, being outed in that moment, depending on where they're at. But nonetheless, I've had people, I got an email from an old colleague who I haven't talked to in a while. And I saw that she used they, them pronouns for me. And I had heard from a client that's because she had told that colleague about, oh, by the way, Dara uses they, them pronouns now. And so I thanked the person. Thank you for, pointing that out. And thank you to the other person for, being consistent and doing that. And so those are really, you're right. Those really, really do impact and make those little things make such a big difference.
Yeah. 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 It's something to just keep thinking about. And it's not, I think it's okay that it's not easy. Like we're therapists. We do stuff that's really hard. It's okay if it's not easy to like look at the world in a new way. It's really worth it.
Absolutely. And, one thing I try to keep in mind is that even though when it comes to this particular community, I feel like I'm a part of the trans community, but there are definitely other marginalized communities I'm not a part of. And so simultaneously, as I'm kind of on this side of things with this, I'm on the other side of things with that. And so I am paying a lot of attention to that sort of in myself, how is it that I want to teach people to be like this with the trans community? Oh, wait, I better take my own advice when it comes to working with communities I'm not a part of. And so that's been really humbling, like you said, in terms of
Mm.
humility and taking that step back and recognizing like, oh, there's that discomfort. That's what I need to stay in. That's what I need to sit in and really go deeper and see where is this coming from? Because that's what I'm expecting of, for instance, the therapist that I'm training to work with trans clients.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah. And like to just kind of sit our asses down and be with the discomfort and stay committed, even when we make mistakes and get called out or get called in, to just like sit and not give up.
Mm-hmm. I heard at a workshop I went to a couple weekends ago, it had to do with white fragility. And they mentioned that being in that discomfort is where the resilience comes from. You need to go ahead, you'll become more resilient to that discomfort and that's what you need to do, because you have to stay in that place of discomfort if you're going to learn. And if you're going to
Mhm.
reflect and change. So the more you do that, the more it'll happen. And then you'll say like, there's that discomfort. And instead of trying to flee from it and do probably very unconscious distraction techniques, you recognize it and then you say, okay, this is hard, but I've been through this before. I need to stay in the
Mm.
discomfort. And that's where the resiliency comes in.
Yeah. And that makes me think of something else too. That's like when two people who are not in the marginalized group are having a conversation and one calls the other on stuff, that's like perhaps a little bit less labor than that someone in the marginalized group is going to have to do. So that's just setting that off for me, is the idea of like, where can you build resiliency without
Mm-hmm.
necessarily causing harm to people in the marginalized group?
Mm. Yeah, that's cool that you brought that up. I was just thinking about that yesterday, because the position that I'm in, I do put myself out there as an educator, and I'm open to people asking me questions specifically about being non-binary as well. And so it can be confusing, because I don't mind being,
Mm.
I guess, being put in that place of, hey, you're in the group, can you teach me stuff? However, I think I was talking about this with my daughter. She's 17, and we talk about these kind of things. I was saying that I feel like maybe taking a step back, it would be nice if somebody asked me first if it was okay, because I might not be in the mood that day. I might have,
Yeah.
it just personal reasons, or maybe I'm like, I talked a lot about being non-binary today. I just don't have it in me. Can I give you a resource instead? Or like you said, talking to somebody else about like, why is it that I am so resistant to using they them pronouns? Like,
Yeah.
I don't really always want to be on the other side of that conversation, because meantime I'm being it feels hurtful that I'm like, why can't you just do it? Like, then I don't really feel like I'm being a very good educator, and I'm just being a human in that moment.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I've wondered about that, because I know how important it is not to put people who are in the marginalized community in that position. And yet I do welcome that myself, because I'm comfortable with that. But then I recognize I'm not 100% always comfortable with that. And so I think, just as a suggestion to those listening, is that, if you know somebody and you're like, God, I want to work on this in myself, whether it's, it has to do with race or gender or sexual orientation, and you know somebody and you want to ask them about it, ask them first and say, here's
Mm.
something I've been thinking about, and it's a question I have. How do you feel about that if I were to pose that to you? And if it is uncomfortable, please let me know, and I will seek out different resources.
What has surprised you or challenged you, if anything, about stepping into more leadership? Like, are there places in you that got kind of stretched or pushed by coming forward and being so much more visible?
Great question. I would say the first thing that came to mind is that knowing that I can't please everybody, and especially I think when it comes to, let's say, terminology and things that are changing when it comes to non-binary language, transgender language, it's so important to stay on top of that and to know, here's a word that we used to use, but we don't use it anymore. And here's why. Because then, I'm like, oh, I better make sure I remember that, and better make sure I teach other people that. But I too will accidentally mess up, or I haven't stayed on top of something, or honestly, maybe I've got too many balls that I'm juggling one day and I share an article without having really thought through at least like sharing an article, but then not putting a appropriate caption to it. Like, wow, this article is interesting, different viewpoints here. What do you think? And instead just share it. And then people are like, oh my God, like there's such transphobic things in this article. And I'm like, oh no, it's a lot of responsibility to make sure that you take your time and really think about what you put out there. And also still knowing in the end, it's still going to potentially upset people. I used to be bothered by the so-called trolls, but I've recognized by now that that's not who I'm concerned about. It's if I actually do something that upsets somebody in the community. That's really what matters. And that's really where I just can feel it in my heart and my gut and want to know how do I fix this? And it does take a lot of humility, like you said. So I would say that's one of the biggest responsibilities, that it's a struggle, but I know that it's a necessary part of it. And I need those learning opportunities.
That's so cool. Yeah. So do you think that clarity of like who it is that you want to not necessarily please, but serve has gotten more and more crystallized?
Yeah, I would say so. One of the things I really have noticed is there's so much variation, within the community. And I would even say, especially when it comes to even generational differences. I mean, I have clients who are in their 60s who are just now thinking about transitioning. And then I have those in their late teens. And there's some things that they both, absolutely can relate to and connect on the same level. And there's other things that is just light years difference. The reasons that this person in their 60s didn't transition is because transitioning in the 1970s was truly dangerous. I mean, it is even today, but back then, and in terms of being pathologized and surgeries not being where they're at right now, them not having the internet to access, them having repressed it for decades, and then finally looking it up on the internet, 10 years ago and being like, oh no. Whereas a teenager, I mean, I have people that email me who are 10 and who are like, hey, I found your video online. And so this is a 10-year-old who already knows there's people out there like me. Whoa, like they may be scared and overwhelmed, but they're like, all right, at least I'm not, all these bad words that get filled in the head of the people who are a different generation. So trying to make sure, how do I make sure I'm talking to all these different audiences at the same time? And I tend to be a perfectionist, and I have had to learn that I can do my best in making sure that happens, but it is certainly not going to happen every time. But so far, the way I've been able to navigate that is as often as I can, just kind of to recognize, like, here's an article I'm sharing. Not everybody may agree with what is said in here. I'd be curious to hear your perspective, and let's have a civil conversation about this.
So it's so much your way, like your stance and even your personality. It seems like that makes that possible to stay in that in-between place with being an expert and also staying open and learning and learning and learning.
I think that must be why I originally called my blog Conversations with the Gender Therapist, and it has stuck as a brand when it comes to the YouTube channel and the Facebook page. And I think it is because it keeps me focused on how these are conversations we're having. I may be like, here's Dara, and Dara knows all this stuff and whatever, but that's a very uncomfortable pedestal for me. I'm like, we're just having conversations together about this.
Yeah. And I mean, and if you're talking to someone like me who's not in the marginalized group, it's like, I'm delighted to be like, not putting you on a pedestal, because that's a lot of pressure, but to say like, I'll follow you. Like I want to follow you. And I think that makes it just makes you even more of a strong leader, that you're saying, yeah, thanks. I'll teach you stuff, but I'm also in motion and always learning.
I like that.
So are you still working as a therapist, and how are you balancing like the different kinds of work you're doing?
I would say that's the second thing that came to mind when you asked about challenges, because I definitely am still seeing quite a few clients. And so I would say there's so much that I have as ideas for new courses or new resources that I want to create. I also want to be able to go to more conferences and do trainings and speaking. I can feel that shift happening where I want to be able to do that. At the moment, I feel for two reasons. And just to be realistic, I do need to be able to have the client income at this point. But in my area where I am still very much needed. There are therapists who are learning how to do this, but it's too soon for me to be able to stop seeing clients. So there's that responsibility there, while at the same time trying to do all the other things I want to do. I also mentioned I have a daughter. She's starting her senior year of high school. And so I'm trying to, like, this summer is filled with college tours and trying to help her get a job. And so the part of being a parent is a balancing act as well. I also have a wife and a stepdaughter, and obviously I want to do self-care. So I would absolutely say that that is a point of contention with myself in trying to figure out how to balance all this. So I have no great answer for that, because it's a struggle to balance it all. And it's also very comforting that perhaps you've heard too on some of these podcasts we listen to. It's reassuring to know that a lot of entrepreneurs have this as a challenge. And then so there's all these awesome ideas about how to structure your time and how to do things in batches. And so I find all that information so interesting and useful. And so it's more about implementing it. But each year of life with, for instance, having a kid is different in terms of what they need. And so now I find myself in this place of needing to really prioritize what my daughter is going to be going through. And therefore some things might take a hit from that. So I might not be as present, in the next year when it comes to everything I'm doing, but I'll still be there. And then I have to remember, you know what? Then she'll be in college. And then once my stepdaughter goes to college, I'm going to have all the time in the world to do things. Like, people ask, when are you going to write another book? I was like, not till at least 2020, when my stepdaughter graduates from high school. Because I just know that that's too much of a commitment to make in these really crucial last couple of years as they're moving towards adulthood.
My son, who's editing this podcast, is 15. So I completely relate to this idea that these years it's just, you're so aware. These are our last opportunities for particular kinds of time together. Like, hopefully we'll have a whole lifetime of interactions and relationship, but this is a particular time of like living together and getting to be a parent in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. It sounds like you can relate. It's really neat that he edits your podcast.
Yeah, it's one more cool way to get to interact.
Yeah, that's nice.
So how many hours do you try to work each week, or do you try to limit it to each week?
So I would say I look at it as a combination of seeing clients, and then I guess what we could call maybe the more entrepreneurial side, which sometimes, that's not very sexy. So I try to call it my trans advocacy work or whatever that might be. But so I have like a matrix that I keep track of in Excel, where I'm like, here's how many hours I've seen clients this week, and here's all the other stuff, which is everything from social media and creating a YouTube video, creating the online course, creating the newsletters. So I try to, where does that all come into play? So I would say at this point, when you see clients and you've got like the notes to do and all your correspondence, I would say a total for my private practice hours, I would say at this point, it's probably about a 50-50 split, maybe spending about 20 hours a week doing that. And then the other 20 hours of the week has to do with the more entrepreneurial side of things.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'll say too that during the summer, like if you were to look at my matrix from last week, you'd say you didn't work 40 hours, Dara. But so that's the bonus of being your own boss, is that I had my birthday. I took my daughter on a college tour. So yeah, there was definitely a big chunk of time. And just being an entrepreneur, I feel somewhat guilty about it and like, oh, that work I didn't do. But I also have to remember, one of the reasons that you do this is to be able to have the flexibility to be able to do these things that are important and additionally. So trying to give myself some grace during the summer, knowing that things are a bit chaotic with the schedules being so different, and then letting myself know when the kids go back to school, that's when Dara goes back to school too, when it comes to being able to refocus, creating a new online course, for instance.
Awesome. I think too that protecting your time like that, it can only then preserve you and your superpowers so that you can keep doing this work and, be a leader so much further into the future.
Yes, absolutely. And definitely something that I need to continue to pay attention to and remind myself of, like, no, self-care, you'll be much more productive and useful if you end up doing this.
Yes. So Dara, if you could time travel to the very beginning of, let's say, this more entrepreneurial advocacy part of your journey, what would you tell the Dara of that moment?
So that's a great question. I feel like back then, the angst that I probably put myself through in terms of wondering, is this going to connect? I hesitate to take that away from past me because, I had to go through it for a reason. However, if I could give myself a bit more of a chance to have less anxiety and doubt about it, just that I would trust myself to know, like, this is absolutely, there's a need for this. There's people waiting for you to start creating this information. So just go with it, ease into it, really, dive into the creative aspect of this and have faith that this is something you're going in the right direction for this. But always easier in hindsight to be able to see that.
Totally. But that'll be helpful to somebody who's in that moment right now.
That's right. I really feel like, if you have that gut intuition or whatever you want to call it personally, that you do feel like you're starting to be drawn in a certain area, like really just kind of, it's like a metaphor of like there's a stream and you see it and you kind of jump into the stream and you start feeling it gently guiding you in that direction, then just have that confidence that if this is going to take you, you are serving people in that way. And I think the leadership aspect of it can feel intimidating, but you'll learn as you go along and just have mentors, whether they're in person or these people who host podcasts like Pat Flynn and Tim Ferriss, like they can be your mentors too.
Awesome. Dara, what's the best place for therapists to find you and follow you and learn from you?
I would say checking out my main website, which is at darahoffmanfox.com. It doesn't have an at in the front of it. darahoffmanfox.com. You are more than welcome to email me also at darahoffmanfox@gmail.com because right now my webmaster is working on how to create a separate newsletter pop-up box for therapists to sign up for my newsletter. Because I would say that's one of the best ways to stay in touch with me. So for right now, just send me an email. Let me know that you want to be added to my newsletter list. I'll give you a link for the Trans Affirming Therapist Academy. And I wanted to mention that Facebook group again because it has been instrumental for me to find community and resources and connection. And again, it's the LGBTQ and Trans Affirming Therapists Facebook group. You do have to be approved for it, but basically if the moderator sees that you're a therapist and don't have anything too out there that would indicate that you might not be a good person for the group, then this group is really, I'm in there. There's all sorts of other well-known medical professionals. It's really amazing and it's free and it's people check in it all the time. It's an awesome community.
Oh, awesome. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dara. This has been so incredible to get to hear about your journey and just get your perspective on leadership today.
Yeah, and thank you so much for letting me share, especially in particular this area of interest, this subject area, because it is kind of my passion to make sure the more people that can hear about it and learn about it, the better.
Thanks for listening. Are you ready to build a unique and profitable private practice? We can help you. Our program, the Superpower Method for Therapists, happens twice a year. We work with a group of private practice entrepreneurs on finding and embracing your superpowers, clarifying your niche, and going step by step together to develop and grow your business. Head on over to coachingwithannie.com and click on the Superpower Method to sign up for the waitlist. Enrollment will open very soon. I'll see you next time.